Hello everyone, and welcome to another exciting deep dive in the world of possibilities opened by the recent advancements in artificial intelligence. My name is Alessandro Manzi, and I'm currently leading product management for process mining and AI at SAP Signavio. Today, I will guide you on a journey to understand how generative AI and more broadly artificial intelligence is reshaping the world of process management, and I will share with you some glimpses in terms of our long and short-term direction. But let's take it from the start. Process management or business process management is a discipline with a very long and rich history. And the most significant advancements were brought by the advent of digital technology. Now, we start tracking the generations of this domain and of the software domain from the introduction of the first digital tools to manage collaboratively business process models. This is what we refer to as the first generation of BPM solutions. The second wave happened a few years after, around 10-15 years ago, with the introduction of the first commercial tools for process mining and process analytics. This was a completely disruptive force in the market that brought a new, fresh, data-driven perspective into operational excellence programs and into change and transformation programs. What it gave is the tools and the capabilities to organizations to not only design how they wanted the organization to run, but to also be able to understand how processes were really running based on data coming from their operational systems, to compare those processes with what they designed, and in the end to be able to understand what they needed to change, what was a possibility for an improvement. This was really disruptive, as I said before, and it really fostered a very clear, data-driven and process-centric mindset into the hearts of organizations whenever they were facing a very large or a very complex change, like, for example, moving from ECC to S/4HANA, or deploying a large automation program, or thinking of moving a certain part of the organization to a shared service model, for example. But the third generation, this is really what is going to reshape this domain, possibly for the next 2 decades. Now, one part has already been happening for a while. Process management solutions are simply not living in isolation anymore. Process transformation suites or business transformation suites that combine together different capabilities like modeling, mining, governance, and collaboration and automation are becoming the de facto standard for the market and for all these large transformational programs, and to really have a continuous improvement mindset fully deployed and available in the organization. But AI, and particularly generative AI, is really going to make us rethink the world of possibilities when we look at this domain. And it will give us a push to solve challenges that today we simply consider unsolvable. But let me guide you a little bit on how we are thinking about this third generation. So when we think about generative AI, I think all of us know that it's a technology that is amazing at absorbing large amounts of knowledge and conveying and kind of sharing snippets of this knowledge with the user based on a question, on a prompt. But to do so, it requires large amount of data and high quality information. Otherwise, accuracy and other metrics will simply be not sufficiently good. Now, if you think about the data-driven and the fact-driven angle of a transformation suite, so an organization using tools like process modeling and process mining, the main objective that they strive for is to build and create what we call a process observability layer. This means being able to understand and track and evaluate several different aspects of how processes are running: performance, deviations, bottlenecks, reworks, compliance problems, risks, so many different angles that can be evaluated. And in order to do that, it is not sufficient to only have access to the information about those processes, but you need to also combine that with everything that might have an effect or that might be affected by the processes themselves. For example, when you deploy an automation, this will have an effect on process performance. Or if you run a certain process in a particular way, that might have an impact on the customer or on the employee experience side. So what is important for us is to be able to collect as much as possible information around those processes and synergetic with those processes to be able to make the most comprehensive evaluation about how our organization is running and what we can do better. Now, the great thing is that when we think about who works in a transformation suite with process modeling and process mining tools, we see usually two personas: the business and IT specialists that create and curate content, knowledge, and information in the system itself, and this is then shared with everyone else in the organization, who we call the enterprise citizens, who consume and collaborate on that knowledge. Now, if you kind of virtually draw an infinite loop around these two personas, what you obtain is a learning and feedback mechanism, which means that in the transformation suite, we continuously generate and create and iterate on knowledge based on the input of professionals and experts that know everything about your organization better than anyone else. Now, if you take a generic LLM, which is a body of language and generalistic knowledge, and you augment it with the expertise that has been curated by SAP professionals over the last 50 years, and on top of that, you add the context of the customer, which means all the data and information that exists in your system and in your repository, you obtain what we call an LPM, a large process model, which is a language model that can speak the process language, that can understand, interpret, and even advise around enterprise dynamics. And this will be the foundation for every single thing that we will do going forward as part of our SAP Signavio Process AI program. All applications, all extensions, all add-ons that we will build will be based on exactly this specialistic, this verticalized body of knowledge. Now, to recap, if you take all the data that we collect through this process observability layer and approach, taken from internal and external sources, and you give that in the hands of a process AI platform based on generative AI, but also on more artificial intelligence-oriented services, this then become the foundation. This then become the foundation for a new generation of services that will be completely new and that will generate a new category of insights and recommendations that will power charge or supercharge all your transformation programs. And we do not only talk about one or two or three or four use cases. We talk about a large, vast amount of possibilities and value opportunities that we have in front of us. If we think about all the different objects and artifacts that are managed in a transformation suite, we can think about so many different levels of knowledge that we can use right now. In process management, you have decision diagrams, process diagrams, simulation scenarios, journey models. In process analysis or mining, you have insights, recommendations, dashboards, widgets, and so on and so forth. And all of these have a specific format, a specific language, and generative AI can really help us bridging all these formats and languages and harnessing a new category of value out of all the work that we have been doing in this type of system for over the last 10 years. But let's take it away from this large picture and let's take it back into one very crisp use case to give you a little bit of an understanding of how data and generative AI can be combined together to open up to new possibilities for the world of transformations. So one of the first use cases leverages one of kind of the key principles of generative AI, absorbing large amount of knowledge and giving it back in a consumable form to the user. Now, as I said before, at SAP, we have a lot of expert knowledge. We have several repositories of content that we have been working on over the last years, many decades actually. One of these is a repository that is called Opal, that includes 5,000 process models and 2,000 KPIs that now we are giving in the hands of generative AI and to this specific application in a way that then it can be served back to the user based on a prompt or on a query. But let me show you a little bit of a more detailed demo about this. So for this demo, I will wear the proverbial hat of a finance lead, or in general, someone that works in the finance department and needs to start understanding how to improve a process without having no information at all at disposal on where and how to start. So the first thing, and the only thing that I kind of know at this point, is that I need to understand if there is any level of best practice in the market or on a system perspective that might be helping me to understand what I can do better. So the first thing I can do is ask it. I can simply type in the prompting panel to help me finding or creating a new process model, for example, related to invoice to pay. But this is just an example. It could be related to HR with a certain onboarding practice, maybe relatable or that works well in a certain market unit or country. What I get is two very clear recommendations, J60 account payable and J45 procurement of direct materials. Now, this is already a wonderful start. Like this, I can simply click on review. This will be loaded from the repository into my own system and previewed on the left of the screen. This means that I have now access to the way that SAP, because this is an SAP best practice, intends us to basically deploy this accounts payable process in an S4 or in an ECC system, which means that I can understand if there is any practice, any tip that I can pick up in order to improve my day-by-day business execution or my technical deployment in the system. But as Peter Drucker said, only what's measured improves. This means that in order to make real changes to our process and also to be able to then track them once we do them, we need to establish a clear data-driven framework that will help us really doing all this prioritization exercise. And again, what we can do is simply ask for it. We can simply type in that we would like to get, for example, some metrics that help us tracking a certain dynamic like late payments in this case. The application will go again into the repository. It will look into all the thousands of KPIs that we have, and based on the process that you have in place and the question that you have done, it will give you a few recommendations of what you could add to your monitoring framework or start tracking overall. In this case, for example, we get 3, error in payment runs, automation rate for supplier invoice clearing, and overdue and open account payable items. The application also fetches current performance data and trends, as you can see on the right with the green number, and it locates the actual metric on the process map. You see that with those violet boxes, to really give us full understanding of where the potential for improvement might be, and in general, where we might need to focus our attention of the improvement program itself. Now, this was really just an initial snippet of something that we are working on as part of the Process AI program, but as you might be already thinking yourself, this is not the end. This is just kind of an initial entry point use case. And this is because generative AI is a very incremental technology. We are not able to deliver all the potential of this technology in the first generation of services that we will build. But we will need to creatively combine services and new methodologies and technologies together to solve even bigger and more challenging problems. Now, for example, if we think about what could be the evolutionary step of this first application that I have shown a system of recommendations, giving some inputs based on data, and previewing a little bit the content so that we can make our own considerations. But no change was done. No advice in terms of how to change was given to us. This would be exactly the next step. A system, we call it Process Change Recommender, that is able to identify the change that you could be doing to your own process based on the best practice that you have chosen. And in the end, even implement it in the model itself in a completely automated way without any level of manual intervention. But let me show you how this could work technically and how we are really thinking these services to be combined together. So when we think about kind of the processing steps behind two applications like the one that I just showed, the Process and KPI Recommender and the Process Change Recommender, we can see, for example, that everything will start with the BPMN model on the left. Once this is loaded into the repository, then this is going to be translated by the first service into a description, which can then be augmented with a new instruction that can be user-based or can also be based on a recommendation of AI. A second service will merge the two texts, the two descriptions, into a new final process description, which then in the end will be given to a third service, which will translate the text, the new final text, into the new BPMN model, the new process model that will be loaded into the repository and given at the service of the user for whatever additional work that they have to do. So this was kind of an initial overview into the short-term direction of SAP Signavio and our usage of generative AI. But when we look into even further down in the future, is there more? Yeah, there is so much more. There is a whole world of possibilities and opportunities and value that we are still having the possibility to explore. And some of it, we have already done it on our side. We already kind of put our future hat and started looking into the complete realm of possibilities and where this could take the whole domain of process management. But let me give you a little bit of a snippet here. So for this, I will kind of have a different hat, so not the finance lead hat, but I will put a process improvement specialist hat, and I will show you how a completely AI-infused transformation suite can help me going through my transformation programs. In this case, for example, what I can see is that AI is already helping me to understand what on a complex screen like this monitoring cockpit might be relevant for me to observe or to track. In this case, it looks like in the finance domain, I have some opportunity for improvement. This is also reflected on the right in the prompting panel itself, where I get a clear description of exactly what's shown in the application screen. And I also get the recommendation to go one level down to see the finance details. I can quickly do that. I see that now I have two clear distinctions, invoice to pay and invoice to cash, and I see all the different sub-processes that are contributed to those domains. The first one, the supplier payment from purchasing, is indicated as the one where I might do some actual changes. And on the right, in the prompting panel, AI is advising me on what are the actual changes that I could run, adding a few KPIs to my monitoring framework, adding an automation to my process, or having a look to a best practice model to maybe find some possibility for improvement, exactly like we have seen in the demo before. Now, what is important is AI in the future will be able to fix it all independently because it will have access to enough examples on how to do it. But most people will need to get the full kind of review of every single step. And AI will be able to provide exactly this layer of explainability by accessing all the different services and capabilities and applications in the transformation suite and giving us the relevant information that we need to satisfy our hunger for knowledge and really give the green light for the change to be executed. Here, for example, I'm reviewing the bot, the automation itself, and I'm asking why this bot and what's the expected outcome. I get a clear explanation, but this is also not sufficient for me. I need to add an additional condition to make sure that for invoices beyond $20,000, this can be unblocked not by a bot, but by a human. This is drafted directly by the AI companion, is then added to the model on my command, and now I have a beautiful draft that I can share with my IT or my automation team for further processing and to have an implementation in a kind of governance central way. At last, AI will also surface information which is relevant and important for me, for example, for decision making, in a completely on-demand way and as an overlay to my existing screens. Here, for example, I'm back in my original monitoring cockpit, and AI gives me the simulation of what could be the impact of this change. And on the right, it also advises me that I can come back to check my monitoring cockpit in 90 days, because that's when the first observable results will be in place. Now, this was just a kind of a quick overture of how generative AI could reshape the world of process management and in general our software domain. But this is applicable to many other software domains. And if you want to learn more about artificial intelligence and everything about generative AI, don't forget that here at SAP, we do take care of our ecosystem and community being engaged and also enabled. So please visit learning.sap.com/TechEd if you want to access our broad offering of courses and learning, and in general get upskilled on artificial intelligence. Thank you, and let's move to the question and answer. Live Q&A. Okay, perfect. So I see we have one question. So we have, how can AI be applied to process mining for the SAP Signavio transformation suite? That's a great question, because I spoke primarily about the work that we can do on the process modeling perspective, and I showed you a couple examples there, but I haven't gone into the mining side. Now, in process mining, as I said before, there are many different documents that we can use, many different artifacts that we could use with this technology. An example could be, for example, the support for querying. So you might know that process mining leverages very specific queries that need to be built. that need to be built. And and generative AI can help us and support us in bridging, for example, the specialist knowledge that is required to build such queries and to basically create the metrics that we will use to track performance in our process mining environment. Another use that we can foresee is, for example, to help us building what we call the event logs. The event logs are the basic data structure that we need to analyze data with a process mining platform and to really look into the events and the behaviors. And with generative AI, we can also support the generation of the SQL scripts that are required to transform data from a relational structure that we get from the enterprise systems into the event log itself, which as of today is still one of the most complicated activities in a process mining deployment. A last example could be, for example, to have the full explainability of a dashboard. So as I said before, AI can turn application screens into insights and can kind of provide us this level of guidance in a textual way. So with this type of technology, we could have AI really giving us some hints and some descriptions and some advice on what are, for example, widgets that are showing something that is not working that well, or certain parts of my dashboard that might require attention, or even give us a little bit of guidance into how to read certain graphics, certain charts that might be a little bit more challenging for a traditional user. And with this, I think we have no more questions, so I thank everyone for coming to my session, and I wish you a wonderful continuation of this TechEd virtual event. Thank you.